Hey everyone, welcome to Data Umbrella's webinar. I'm going to do a quick introduction and then I will hand the microphone and the screen share over to Ricardo, our speaker for today. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. A little bit about Data Umbrella. We are a community for underrepresented persons in data science and we are a nonprofit. I am a statistician, data scientist, and you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and GitHub at Reshama S. We have a code of conduct, and we thank you for helping to make this a welcoming, friendly community for all. There are a number of ways that you can support Data Umbrella. The first and foremost is to follow our code of conduct. Another way you can participate and contribute is to ask and answer questions on our Discord, and the link to the Discord is on our website. You can also donate to our nonprofit. We are on Open Collective as Data Umbrella. And if you work for a company that uses Benevity, which has a company matched platform, you can also contribute that way. We have all of our presentations on YouTube, and we have a number of video libraries. So one of them is contributing to open source. And today's presentation will be added to that playlist. We also have 4 really great speakers on career advice. So I recommend checking them out if you're looking for career advice. And these are the playlists that we have. We have data visualization. We have a few videos for data science beginners. We have Scikit-Learn Sprint. And this is our most recent one, which is the PyMC series. This is just a sampling of some of the videos and events that we've had. We have on our website, dataumbrella.org, resources such as list of conferences, guides to using inclusive language, accessibility and responsibility. We encourage you to check them out. We are on all social media platforms as Data Umbrella. The ones that are highlighted here are the ones where we are the most active, so Twitter and LinkedIn. Meetup is the place to join to find out about upcoming events. And I will put some of these links in the chat so you have them. YouTube, if you want to subscribe to it, you'll get notifications when the videos are posted. We have a monthly newsletter as well, and we have a blog. For this webinar, we're using a platform called Big Marker, and it has live captioning. So if you go to the very top of the screen, there are these 2 little letters called CC for closed captioning. You can click on that and choose the language. I've heard that the English closed captioning is very good. You can also do other languages, although I have heard that maybe it's a bit less accurate. We have 2 upcoming events related to this PyMC series, of which today is one of them. On February 8th, we have contributing to PyMC documentation, and on February 18th, 19th, which is 3 weeks from today, there is a PyMC online sprint. And we'll talk a bit more about that at the end of this webinar, and I will put links to how you can join the sprint in the chat once I finish presenting here. So today's talk is contributing to PyMC. Our speaker is Ricardo Vieira. Ricardo is a PyMC developer and data scientist at PyMC Labs. He spent several years teaching himself statistics and computer science at the expense of his official degree in psychology and neuroscience. You can find Ricardo on GitHub at RicardoV94. And with that, I will hand it over to Ricardo.
Thank you, Reshama. Let me share my screen. All right, is my screen visible?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, so let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining today. Thanks Reshma and the Data Umbrella for organizing this series, and the PyMC dev and folks for inviting me and giving some support in this talk. So before I start, you can find the slide. I think the slides have already been shared, but you can also just type this link. And so let's get started. So I was asked to prepare a talk about how to contribute to PyMC. And I ended up derailing that talk and just giving you an experience of how it is like to contribute to PyMC. I will explain a bit the reasons why this became a personal talk and not so much a, let's say, informational talk. But so my intentions before I go there is I just want to give an illustration of how the open source collaboration experience can be like. In specifically, I will show what it looks like to contribute for the first time. I will give my very own example. And then I will also give a bit of an overview of how is it like once you are a more regular contributor and perhaps reviewing other people's contributions. How is that experience? I will give some biased views of what I learned in my open source experience. Mostly, perhaps I would emphasize that it all feels pretty random in the sense that, well, I think nobody grows up thinking, I'm going to contribute to open source when I'm an adult. And also, most of us, I think, stumble by accident in open source, and we stay for a while and contribute, and sometimes we stay for a long time. And I don't think anyone really anticipates their relationship to open source contribution. I will emphasize that I think it's a great opportunity to learn programming and problem solving more in general, and a lot of fun, hopefully. It has definitely been the case for me. And in the end, I will invite you to give it a try if you have been hesitating to contributing or to make it a more regular activity. So the library that I've been contributing and I've been talking about, and the object of this series is PyMC. I will not go into the details of what exactly PyMC does, because there's a great talk in this series that precedes this presentation. But just for those that perhaps didn't join, PyMC basically is a Python library that allows you to define Bayesian models, which are just mathematical functions that describe how data is generated given some structure and some parameters. And the game that we play here is that we create a model and then we say, okay, I think this is how my data is generated, but I'm not exactly sure what are the exact values of the parameters of my model. I know they might be between x and y, and also I have some data. And can you give me some some better idea of what might be these values for my parameters? So basically, we give it a model, we give it a data set. I will show you in a snippet, and PyMC crunches the numbers and brings out something that says, I think that given your data and your model, the more likely values for your parameters are between x2 and y2. It looks something like this in a very, very simple case. We usually import PyMC as PM, that's just an alias we give, similar to how people usually import pandas as PD. We might have some data that we recorded from some experiment or from some data set we care about. And we work with a model object, which we instantiate with pm.model, which is just a context manager, and then we give it a name. I'm just gave it a lazy name, M, which I don't recommend you to do when you are starting. And then we say what our model is about. And in our case, we just have two of these parameters, which I call mean and noise. And we just give some information about them. Like we say it follows a normal distribution or around 0 and 1 standard deviation, meaning I'm unsure about the exact mean, but it's something roughly around 0, probably not too big, not too small. And also a noise parameter, which will be a half normal, which is just like the normal, but can only be positive. And then I say my data, I think, is generated by just some distribution around the mean with this noise. This distribution also happens to be a normal. And actually, I have an observations that I want you to consider, which I pass in the keyword observed. And then all the magic that PyMC does is in the next line where we say, give me a posterior, which is just a fancy expression for give me the parameters you think agree with my model and my data. And PyMC has some very sophisticated algorithms and will give you samples that basically satisfy these constraints. If you want to learn more about PyMC per se, if you don't know already, just check our documentation, check the great talk by Austin in this series. I will jump to the point of my talk, and just to give some overview, a bit to emphasize the randomness of my personal experience, I will show you a personal timeline and a PyMC timeline side by side. I will start in 2003, which, as far as I know, is when PyMC version 1 development actually started. And around this time, I was in primary school, probably playing Pokemon in recess. Then 7 years later, PyMC version 2, the official scientific paper, is published. Around this time, I was in high school. In terms of programming, I was probably dabbling for the first time in JavaScript, which meant mostly watching YouTube tutorials for learning how to program games or doing some interactive websites. 3 years later, PyMC version 3 is released for the first time. Around this time, I'm doing a bachelor's in psychology, where I learned I started learning statistics for the first time. I started learning these, what here I call old-fashioned, but they're still pretty current, frequentistic statistics that many in the audience will probably know about. 2016, the PyMC version 3 paper, official scientific paper, is published. And around this time, I'm doing a master's in neuroscience and getting my first Python experience. Mostly porting some old Python 2 code that someone had written for our experiments, which meant, I guess, I was adding print statements around, I was adding parentheses around the print statements. 2018, there's a lot of changes in the Python library, mostly because one of the big dependencies, one of the building blocks that the library is built on officially stopped being maintained. This was the Tiano backend. And so the developers were looking for alternatives where to build the next versions of PyMC, and they were considering TensorFlow probability for a while. And around this time, I was doing a PhD. I started a PhD in cognitive science, where I really focused on started learning Bayesian statistics and Bayesian data analysis. Then 2020, PyMC developers decide that TensorFlow probability is not going to cut it, and they decide to fork and maintain and develop a future version of Tiano, which now is called Ayazara. You heard about this last time if you were in Austin's talk. And this also is the year where I did my first contributions to PyMC. And finally, 2021 for the PyMC is a big milestone because we released the version 4, the beta of the version 4 for the first time. And this, personally for me, it's also interesting year. I became a core developer of the library. I participated in the Google Summer of Code, quit my PhD during this year, perhaps not completely coincidentally. And by the end of the year, I was offered financial support from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. We got some grant via the NumFocus organization, which PyMC is part of, which allows me to keep contributing to PyMC a bit more frequently. So I will just walk you through how this all started and how it feels like to do your first PR. Mostly emphasize how messy it is and how naive I was at the time. Hopefully this will be a motivation for for others. As most contributions started by just opening an issue on the official repository of PyMC, where I just ask, there is this cool distribution that we use, one of the building blocks, which is a negative binomial distribution. And you can define it, or you could define it using 2 parameters in PyMC, but actually there's different ways of specifying this distribution, and most textbooks and a lot of articles out there actually use an alternative way of parameterizing the distribution. And I just asked, guys, would you like to add this feature to the library? It would be really good. I tried to make my case, suggested it wouldn't be too hard. And then I got a reply from Thomas, who is one of the old-timer developers of the library, which asked, great, do you want to open a PR? At this point, I was probably taken aback. I'm not sure I knew what a PR is. For those who don't know, PR is shortened for pull request, and it's kind of the official process through which individuals' contributions get merged into the official library. So I probably thought it for a while, and then did something foolish, which was to reply, sure, I can give it a try. I didn't know much about Git at the time. I knew a bit of PyMC. I had been using it in my work, and yeah, I was in for a lot of surprises. I think, let me just check. Yeah, 3 days later, I opened a PR then. Don't worry about the text. I will just summarize. I just mentioned the issue, what this was doing. It had the green lines are my initial additions. I had 2 initial commits. The tests were failing, as you can see by the X of the second commit. And also I mentioned I didn't figure out yet how the tests in the library work, so I didn't implement them at all. If you guys can give us any tips, any tips, that would be great. And sure enough, a few days later, Alex replied and said, you can look at this, what we already have for this distribution, and some others, it might give an idea. And indeed, it was pretty simple. I just copied the code that was there and changed some things. And that's, I think for most of us, how we start programming is just kind of pattern matching and changing things that make sense. Tests were still failing, but I guess that's fine. Or I didn't know that was a problem, and I just asked them, then Thomas, Alex, would this test be enough? Thinking I was, had done a good job, this looked nice. And then that's when I started to realize that contributing to a well-established project takes a bit more effort. Actually, Marco replied. He had not been in this conversation until then, and I said, in his opinion, I think you should add some some tests for the new checks you added for the different combinations of the parameterizations. And I replied, yeah, that makes sense, but I have no idea how to do it. And basically, I took a lazy approach, and I asked, could you give some hint or some code example how that might look like? And Marco was nice. He basically wrote a test for me, put it in the snippet, and explained that I could use this PyTest raises, which is a way to make sure that we are raising an exception. I added those lines. Now somehow the tests were all passing as well. And before I continue, I brought up Marco here as a random guy, but he actually he has contributed several times to PyMC, and he's a core developer of the Pandas library, if I'm not wrong, and he actually did a data umbrella event before on contributing to Pandas. I think he does a live PR. It's a very, very cool video. I recommend you guys to check it out. But so at this point, I thought, I did the test. I did additional tests. This is probably done. But it's usually not like that. And Marco gave it a bit more thought and said, probably we can clean this a bit if you use this other construct from PyTest, which is parameterize, which allows you to write a different unit tests in a more clean way. He presented the code, how it might look like. This was totally new for me, but I tried it out. I copy-pasted, changed some things, and replied, I added these things. Do you need anything else? Actually, I added more stuff than he mentioned, so I asked, is it too much? But at this time, Thomas just decided this was nice, immerse, and that was the end of my my first ever PR. So I tried to think about how did this feel like. I guess I reconstructed it more than I actually remembered because it was some time ago. Definitely, it was more work than I expected at first. I learned a lot of new things I didn't even know were things. Mostly related in this first PR. It was pretty straightforward, but it was mostly related to unit testing, this parameterizing in tests. There was not this pull request, but one immediately after I learned about monkey patching and code style checks, which if you don't know about, you'll soon find out once you start contributing, because they will always be biting you. Also learn there's a whole community around the library, and a lot of people will be there to support, but also to challenge you and ask you to do it better. And I guess it was fun. I think it was fun. It's definitely fun now, but who knows 1 year ago how it was actually. I know I came back for more, so this was the pull request I just walked you guys through. It went from the 26th of September to the 1st of October. I opened a pull request a month and a half later. This one actually was never merged. These things usually, it's not so uncommon. And also on the few days later, I opened a small pull request just to fix a regression. And eventually I kept coming back for more. And 1 year later of work, the core developers asked me if I wanted to join their official team, in a sense, give me the keys to the library, which means now I have access to the secret luxury mansion that PyMC developers can use at any time. But in practice means there's a new badge in my GitHub profile, which my developer tools tell me it's 32 by 32 pixels. So not the greatest material gift, but it's very nice to be part of the community. And yeah, so that was my first experience. I'm a core developer now, and I wanted to show you guys maybe a flip of the coin. How is it like to review someone else's first PR when you get to play the reviewer role? And hopefully this gives a more full picture of the whole contribution experience. So this started some weeks ago. I opened an issue about a new feature we wanted to add to the PyMC library. It was a small function that just a helper function to just draw random draws from a distribution. I wrote some text, gave a snippet how it should look like. And a couple days later, Dan, who had never contributed to PyMC, replied and asked if he could take up on the issue. He also asked very useful questions immediately that I had about information I hadn't thought about, mainly where to put the function and whether there was already some kind of similar code that he could look at and borrow ideas from. I replied, and a few days later then opened a pull request that was quite complete already at the start. I think way better than my original pull request. It had tests, it had doc strings, it had everything. But unfortunately, I was reviewing it, and I'm always a bit nitpick, so we went in some iterations where we tried to improve a bit. What you are seeing here is basically the helper function without the doc strings. It's just to show that it was a small contribution, just a couple of lines, and to emphasize that even these small ones always take a lot of work. So we did some work. We took a check that was actually not necessary because it could never be triggered. We cleaned a bit the test to make it more readable. And I realized there was a formatting issue in our docstring. So when we tried to build the documentation, so I just pinged Oriol, who is our master guru on documentation, whether he could check out what was wrong, because honestly, I don't know much about it. So I offloaded it to him, and a couple of days later, he actually came and said exactly, this line, you just probably need to add a tab or something. And he also found other issues in the doc strings, and then was very responsive. He quickly fixed those issues. And now we have these doc strings that look like these, including our code example, which is what we were having issues with, rendering nicely. And actually, I was doing these slides, and I realized that during these revisions, we actually changed one of the default arguments. So there's an error in our doc strings that says that the default is 500 rows, but it's actually 1. And this is still an issue in our documentation. So if someone who is watching this video feels like doing a tiny pull request, you can find this function, change this line, and feel free to open the pull request. discontinued a bit afterwards. The point is not really the actual changes we did, but just this how this forth and back looks like when you are doing a pull request. I suggested that we could simplify these lines into something smaller, and suggested maybe we don't even need this. We can just pass it directly to whatever function we were calling downstream. And then replied, yeah, I have tested the code you suggested, but it fails. He found a line that's failing, which was actually a soft bug we had downstream. So there we went on a rabbit hole. We changed a function downstream, and now we could change the original changes we wanted in the helper draw function. And around this time, I thought Dan already did a lot. He did great work. The tests were passing. The function was working as expected. So before I merged, I had to rebase because there were other pull requests that were merged in the meantime, and the code was conflicting. And I went ahead and also changed some internal variable names, fixed some type hints. And this was a mistake because then I got very involved and I decided, actually, this could be simplified a bit more. So I ended up rewriting everything that Dan wrote, almost. Hopefully, he didn't mind it too much. And the point I'm bringing this up is that this is really a collaborative experience, and you're going to suggest code and people are going to change it. But in a sense, it wouldn't be possible without the initial contribution because it had all the tests there, which make it much easier to refactor. And also, it was during this forth and back that both Dan and me got kind of the context necessary to really understand what the function is doing and should be doing. But in the end, I rewrote most of it. I think I even apologized officially to stealing the fun away from him, but then was pretty happy with the outcome. And if I had to answer again the question of what is it like now to review someone else's first PR, I'll just say it's fun without the interrogation mark. It's definitely fun. But to be a bit more honest, I'm still figuring it out. I still started not so long ago, reviewing other people's pull requests. So perhaps later I'll be able to give a more fully fledged reply. And I wanted to just conclude with some random thoughts for, if you have any questions about, or if you would like any advice about what you need to become let's say a happy open source software contributor. These are just some random suggestions, but I do believe them. I think the first and most important thing is to find a project, an open source project, obviously, that you care about, either because you use it regularly or because the kind of problems it's solving is problems you find interesting and you care about. Because first, there are like thousands of libraries out there that you can contribute and that are welcoming new contributions. And more importantly, because hopefully, as I showed in these examples, it takes a lot of work and a lot of navigation and, to understand the structure of the library and exactly how things connect to each other. And this can be a bit tough if you are not personally invested in the library. So definitely find a project you care about. Then engage with the community. Some communities will be more open than others, but it will always have to come from you, either replying some open issues on the repositories. Ask if you can be the one taking care of an issue, or just ask where to start. In PyMC, we label our issues with beginner friendly. Those are issues we think will be easier to start with, and then most other modern open source projects also follow similar strategies. Be open to challenges. It's a very challenging process. Most of us, usually many of us have informal software development experience. Most of us do not, maybe don't even have classes that teach us how Git or GitHub works, all these code collaboration tools that are necessary. I would suggest be ready to learn. It's all about learning. You never stop learning. You're going to be wrong many times. Be ready to accept that. A lot of frustrations you'll find a lot of frustrations. Sometimes others will tell you are wrong, but you are actually correct. Maybe you worked on, you work on this issue a bit more. There was old code you tried and doesn't work, so you know the edge cases a bit better, and your reviewer, for instance, might not be aware of them and might suggest some dead end that you already explored. So it's really important to basically communicate, make your cases a bit strong, just communicate and help others figure out why did you write the code the way you wrote. I would say take responsibility seriously. You might be writing code that will be used by millions of people for many years, and they rely on it working properly for the jobs or important problems they are trying to solve. Obviously, we'll do mistakes. We all do. We're always fixing bugs. But if we start with taking it seriously, hopefully we get more quality code. Be patient. This is, I think it's very important because most open source projects, including PyMC, people are doing it are contributing and helping on a volunteering basis. So this means we are using some extra hours after work or after studies where we have some free time to review pull requests, to answer questions, to help in this iterative process. And it means that it can take quite a while to get things to the finishing line. And lastly, obviously, be polite and treat the community well. And that's what I wanted to tell you guys. And I'll be very happy to answer any questions about open source contributions and PyMC also if you have specific questions in the Q&A. And thanks again, Reshama and Data Umbrella.
Hey, Ricardo, thanks so much for your talk. Somebody put a comment in the chat that says, indeed, this talk is inspiring and authentic. So it really resonated with me. We do have one question, which is, do I need to understand Bayesian stuff to contribute to PyMC?
Right. No, definitely not. So there's, yes, so let me think about, no, there's a lot of issues that are about writing tests, about documentation, about just thinking about a user API that are not about just understanding the actual kind of problems we are solving. And so definitely not. And I think a lot of people contribute to PyMC. Most of us, we are learning Bayesian statistics and we use it as an excuse to learn it better. Definitely, if it's something you want to learn about, then contributing to PyMC is a great way. And this comes with what I was saying of being invested in the project. So if it's something you would like to learn about, definitely contributing to PyMC is going to enable you that. And it's going to also motivate you to go through the struggles of understanding the library, of course.
So I just want to add to that response. We have some prereqs that are listed on our sprint event by Mino and Oriel, who are organizing the sprint as well from the PyMC side. So I'll just read those requirements just so you know. So working knowledge of some programming language. Python is good to know, but you don't have to know Python. If you know another language, that's fine. And then familiarity with basic statistics is helpful. You don't need to know a whole lot, but some familiarity, at a intro class level is helpful. So somebody else has a question, which is, when you began contributing to OSS, what can you say was your biggest challenge and how did you overcome it?
Biggest challenge, I think it was just lack of knowledge about Python language and the Python testing frameworks. Right, those are things I probably never wrote a test before, so it's mostly it was a question of understanding how you write, library quality standard code, other than just private code that I write for myself. I never write tests. Usually don't write documentation, and it's very different kind of a final product than code that goes into a well-established library.
And the next question is, I'm building hierarchical logistic regression with one variable and having lots of issues. Oh, I don't know if this is related. Sorry. This course.
That's fine. I suggest
Okay, no.
we have a PyMC discourse where it should be easy to find on Google, and feel free to open a topic there. Usually, folks respond very quickly, and it's much easier to give feedback because we can see the code that you are actually using and reason about it other than in a video chat.
There's another question. Can you recommend some cheat sheet types for GitHub and similar tools? Sometimes it's difficult to find the right answer.
Yeah, I don't know any. I always end up Googling. It's definitely difficult to find. I would consider myself a Git noob, and the GitHub, okay, it's less complex. It's just a website around it. No, I don't have any, but I'm sure some other folks in the chat might have good ideas. I end up Googling all the time.
So, I'll just take, let me turn on my camera. So I will also just take a couple of minutes and talk about the upcoming PyMC online sprint. It is February 18th through 19th, so it begins on Friday to Saturday. There are certain shifts, and that time frame is still being sort of set up, but we'll post it on the Meetup group. It's going to be online on Discord. It's very beginner friendly. So, it's okay if you're not a Git expert. It's okay if you're not a statistics expert. It's okay if you're not a Python expert. There are, people come in with all sorts of different knowledge, and you can, work with somebody, and there will be core developers online that can answer questions for you. And the issues that are being selected are, they're intended to be beginner friendly. I can also, I'm just going to read Oriel's comment in the chat. Oriel is one of the maintainers of PyMC, who is also organizing the sprint. And Oriel says that you can add some notes on contributing without knowing statistics. You can, and we have many things to do. We need help with our infrastructure, for instance, the test that Ricardo mentioned, building and hosting the documentation. We need help with just pure code numerical issues. But as Ricardo mentioned, if you're not interested at all in statistics, contributing somewhere else might be better to stay motivated. Anything, if you have any questions about the upcoming sprint, feel free to ask them. And I'll share if you the link is on PyMC open source sprint as well. So there's a general question about open source, which is how was the process for you to get financial support to contribute to open source?
Right. So I guess this is about the grant that I'm currently in. It was pretty random. That I think it's the lesson I would take from here. So I did. Actually, there are two. So there was a Google Summer of Code that was a normal application, right? That's a very open protocol, so everyone can apply. We do that every year. And then there was this internal grant that the PyMC library had via the NumFocus organization, and I was just asked informally if I would like to receive it. So this was work that was done in the previous year by the core developers to apply to the grant and receive it, and I was not part of it, so I really don't know how tough it is to get this kind of financial support. But once it was there, I was just offered it, so I got it without doing any of the work.
Okay. Thank you. If anybody has any more questions, we'll just stay online for a couple more minutes. I'm happy to add to the question, which is, how was the process for you to get financial support to contribute to open source? Mina, who is one of the organizers of the sprint, was a Google Summer of Code scholar last year. I've heard some other people speak as well, and I was reading a thread on Twitter as well, and one of the best ways is to just like start contributing. Having a record of doing some contributing sort of like really is a way to establish yourself and to get you on that path if you want to contribute to open source, with some sort of financial support. Somebody asked, I just talked about the sprint, but if you have specific questions about the sprint, we're happy to answer it. It's going to be online. There's going to be issues that are curated. There will be maintainers to answer questions. If you know anything about whether it's Git or documentation or statistics, whether you know one of those things, or if you don't know those, there are people that will be available to help. And so Oriel has a response to the funding for open source and says, I helped a bit with the grant application. Here's a link to the announcement. So it links to the Chan Zuckerberg Bayesian open source software for medicine. What I'll do is I'll also copy a link to that and put it in the description of the video when I post it, so people who are watching the video can also access that link later. And so Oriel says, long story short, we submitted a joint application between 3 libraries in the Bayesian statistics space to have a strong enough proposal. So yes, it sounds like also some of the funding comes from, the people who are maintainers. If they have certain projects, they submit grants, and it moves forward that way. Yep. So, I'll just, one more minute, we'll stay online. If anybody has any questions, this is your opportunity to ask while we are online and answer that question. Benjamin says, great talk. Any scope for a technical or practical talk on contributing for beginners?
I guess as a follow-up event. Yes, definitely. We will we will organize in next week some talks just to get the knowledge of the library, how it's structured. We'll probably record that, and we can share it also in the Data Umbrella channel. And this will be a talk. It will be very informal, but it will be giving an idea of the building blocks of the libraries, where things are, so that you have a bit of a rough picture of how the library is structured and recognize some of the moving blocks once you start contributing.
So yes, this is a reminder that the next webinar is on contributing to documentation of PyMC. And documentation is a great way to begin contributing to open source. So that's actually a great way to begin as well. And also, I might just be committing myself to something, but I am in the process of, I set up my virtual environment for PyMC. And so my next step is to work on a contribution. And so perhaps I will record my contribution, and that will be a resource for this sprint as well. With that, I will I will thank our speaker again. Thank you so much, Ricardo, for joining us.
Thank you.
And doing this presentation. It was inspiring to many, and the video will be up very soon. Thank you.